Yeah, I had my camera really close to the fire there, and I'm probably not going to do that again. Anyway, hi guys, welcome back to the Danger Pit. I'm still Chef Danger. So summer in the UK is basically over, and we've had a bit of a cold one anyway. There's not been a whole hell of a lot of sunny days, and so I've not really done a whole lot of cooking, which is a real shame. So with that in mind, I'm going to go and nip to the butcher's. I'm going to go and buy a pork belly, and then I'm going to bring it back and I'm going to show you guys how I do my hickory and cherry smoked spicy honey butter babyback ribs. And yes, I did feel a little bit naughty saying that. Yeah, it's going to be fantastic. I'm going to run you guys through how I do the trim. I'm going to show you guys through my rub, what I do with the fires, and then we're going to get some brilliant ribs at the end of it. And as well, with the belly part of the pork belly, I will get that curing, and that'll be for the next video where I show you guys how we make some bacon. So brilliant, let's get into it. With that said, in fact, before we do dive into this, I'm just going to do a little quick explanation of a pork belly for the uninitiated. So let's get to it.
Now, if you look at my amazing drawing of this whole hog here, you'll see that the pork belly is essentially the flank which bridges the picnic, which is the front leg, and the butt, which is the shoulder, to the ham, which is the hind legs of the pig. This cut is the most sought after cut on the pig. It has the most intramuscular fat, it has the softest texture, and this is what we use to make bacon. Now, what we have when we lift the ribs away from the belly is we get babyback ribs. If you wanted to, you could trim these down to create the other cuts of ribs. Lose the top, you have spare ribs. Lose the bottoms as well, and then you have St. Louis style ribs, which have the more classic uniform look about them. Now, I'm keeping these as babyback ribs because they have more meat, and the meat across the top is tender and beautiful. Also, the idea of trimming the rib tip seems wasteful to me, and we're not about that life on the Danger Pit. Right, so I'm back from the butcher, and here's the plan. We're going to take this pork belly, we're going to remove the ribs, I'm going to tidy them up just a little bit, we're going to get them slathered and rubbed, and then we're going to get them sitting under smoke for about 3 hours. We'll pull them inside, we'll wrap them in a crutch with a few extra finishing touches, and then we'll throw them in the oven for another 3 hours. So that's 6 hours in total, and then we feast. So to start, you can see here I'm trimming down some of the fat and connective tissues. I'm not going to go wild with the trim because honestly it won't matter. Ribs are a very thin cut of meat and I want to preserve as much of the good stuff as possible. Ribs can be really tough and awful if they aren't done properly, so I'll show you guys the method I use to ensure everything renders down nicely and that you end up with lovely velvety moist ribs. Now you'll notice, while I'm cutting here, I'm not doing a great job making sure that I don't pull any of the meat with me when I'm lifting this fat off. This fat sits absolutely parallel and stuck clean to the muscle which runs across the front of the rib cage. This is the pig's brisket. It's essential that you take this particular fat off because you can see how opaque it is and how dense and thick it is. That's not going to render. Now if we try and cook that, all that's going to happen is it's going to stop any smoke penetrating into the pork meat and it won't render. We'll just end up with a tough leathery chunk of useless flesh, whereas by pulling all this fat off and taking a little bit of a hit to the meat that we've got, I'm exposing as much surface area to the smoke and to the rub and the spritz and the slather that we're going to use. It just means maximum flavour, maximum texture. We don't want to waste money, but at the same time I want to make sure, you know, you spend good money on this, and pork belly is quite an expensive cut compared to some of the other cuts of pork because it's so sought after. So I want to make damn sure that whatever I'm putting on the pit and sitting and nursing for hours on end is going to be perfect when it comes off. Now, this little flick here, which is raised up, now I could leave this on, but more than likely what would happen is, obviously when you see bark on smoked meat, you know, it's darker, it's a little bit grittier, it's got a unique texture. Now, this chunk of meat which I've just taken off here, where it was raised off, it would stop the air flowing over the meat, meaning that some of the ribs would be darker than I want it to be, or lighter than I want them to be, and that piece of meat would dehydrate, and then very quickly that would just turn to charcoal and it'd be completely inedible. So, I found the corner beneath the first set of ribs, I've got my knife underneath, and now I'm going to let gravity guide my knife as I cut underneath the ribs here to separate them away from the pork belly. The weight of the pork belly itself will sort of like dictate the direction that I'm going to be cutting, I'm cutting these ribs so they're a little bit meatier than you'd normally get them from your butchers. Usually butchers are a bit more keen to preserve the pork belly as it's the pricier piece of meat, but I wanted some nice meaty ribs. Usually if you get them from the butchers, they're a little bit shyer than this. You'll see some bones shining through when you cook them, whereas I really don't mind. I'm going to be eating the whole thing anyway, so I'd rather have some nice meaty ribs. What's a shame is that I accidentally left the radio on in the background, so you can't hear the sound of this meat slapping around, which is part of the fun for me. Oh well. So it's about 10 in the morning, give or take, at this point. So I've got my coals ready. I'm going to get them dumped inside my firebox, and I'll get the smoker heated through. I forgot to take these grates out, too lazy to re-record. You know how it is. So I'm going to be dumping the coals into here. I've only used about half a chimney. It doesn't take a lot of coal to get these small smokers hot. Tip that bad boy in there. And then I'm just going to have a little rearrange of the coals in here and make sure that I've got them spread out evenly. I want them positioned roughly in the center. It just means that I've not got the coals too close to the cook chamber. It means that when I put my logs on, I'm not going to be creating too much direct heat and grilling my ribs. Yeah, so I've got them about where they are, so it's time to close this bad boy up. And we will come back shortly to drop in a few wood splits. So I've got a bit of hickory, I've got a bit of cherry. Close this lid up, let those warm through, and then by the time we get back to it, we're ready to go. Okay, so if you're a bit of a perfectionist like me, you've probably already found that the pepper that you get in the supermarkets pre-ground is either too coarse, in which case it will drop off when you try and stick it, or it'll fall off when you're spritzing, or it's too fine and it goes cakey and thin and gross when you cook with it. So, as God is my witness, I stood for about 15 minutes grinding all of this pepper down and then proceeded to spill it all over the chopping board. But that's fine, we can live with this. I had the gentle sound of the washing machine in the background egging me on, but again, these are one of the sacrifices that we make. I know full well now that I've got the correct coarseness of pepper that I want. I've used 14 mesh pepper, which is what you buy in America, and it's perfect, so buy that if you can. Now, we can't really get kosher salt here in the UK. We're quite limited on the range of coarseness that we have in our herbs and spices compared to over in America land. Normally I'd just use regular shaker salt, but I ran out. And so, much like spending ages grinding pepper, here I am using my good Malden salt, grinding it by hand. This was a labour of love. It always is. So, I'm going to add a bit of allspice to this rub. I love allspice and everything now. It's got such a weird, lovely, fruity depth to it. A bit of coriander for some strong, bassy tones. It doesn't taste like curry, it just tastes tasty. And just a tiny little bit of chili powder. Fine, we're having loads of chili powder. Yeah, I don't use sugar in any of my rubs. I don't want it to burn on the meat. I don't want to be scraping caramel off the inside of my smoker. Give it a little shake and yeah, that's it. Super simple rub. It works really nice on pork. Okay, so it's been around about half an hour now since we put the coals on. So the smoker's now fully hot all the way through. Drop my hickory and my cherry on, give it a little puff to get it away. You'll notice the cherry catches immediately. It's got a lot more surface area and sharp angles to ignite, whereas the wooden planks of hickory, they're very dense. And so it takes a little bit longer for it to catch. But again, just a little puff and it'll catch. Now, it's always worth getting your fire started before you put the meat on. It just means you've got the whole thing in control. It's all rolling nice and smooth, so that when you sit down, once your meat's on, you're not fighting with the fire to get it started, and we don't get any gnarly, heavy smoke. Just nice and light and fresh. And that's it. Actually, I tell a lie here, that's not it. Gotta remember to get your wood chunks in, warming through, so they ignite good and quick when you put them on in your rotation. Can't forget that. So, here we are. I'm just doing one final last little trim and one little check before I get these slathered and rubbed up. Basically at this point I'm just kind of having fun playing with a really sharp knife. All these bits of silver skin and connective tissues, especially with ribs, you could straight up lose your mind going backwards and forwards trying to ensure that you've got every little piece off. but really it's a waste of time. Now you see me rubbing up the sides and running my hands across this, and it's not just because I'm creepy. I'm checking for any splinters of bone, where these have been machine cut across the top of the rib ends. I want to make absolutely certain that there's no small splinters which could wind up in one of my guests' food when they're eating. So there's no such thing as being too careful when it comes to little tiny slivers of bone, especially when they're cooked. Those things can be razor sharp. So, what I'm doing here, so I've got myself some French's mustard. As far as mustards go, it's got a fairly sweet, neutral taste. Now, for binding's sake, this is just here to make sure that my rub stays adhered to the meat. If I didn't use a binder, you tend to find that, yeah, you'd get some rub adhering to it, but there's not enough tackiness on the surface of the meat itself to keep the rub there for the whole cook, and as the meat would sweat, it would force the rub off and it would just end up running out into your overflow dish. The mustard here just creates contact, that doesn't happen. Now, I'm going heavy on my rub. A lot of the people that I see who cook ribs in America, particularly, they talk about how you should go light on your rubs when you're doing ribs and let the flavour of the pork shine through. And pork, to me, doesn't really have that strong a flavour, and I really like these flavours that I've put into this rub. It'll complement the pork really nicely, particularly that coriander, that allspice, the chili powder, which will add some spice, but it'll also add a colour as well. Now I want to make sure I'm getting all the rib ends, all of the areas, because effectively this is one great big piece of burnt end meat. And so all these sides where I'm making sure that they get a good decent dose of the rub, it's just making sure that there's going to be like beautiful flavour there when we come to eating it. Now the underside of your ribs, they've got a small membrane attached. Now people say you can leave it on, people say you should take it off, and I'm taking it off. I've had ribs where the membrane's still left intact, and while it's not the end of the world, you can still really tell it's there. I way prefer to pull it off. In the movies, you see people ripping this off as one great big sheet. I'm using a piece of tissue paper to give me a little bit extra grip as I pull this off, and it came off in shreds, which is a bit frustrating. But, you know, it's not the end of the world. It does mostly, almost entirely come off. Like I say, you could leave this on, but kind of creates like an onion papery texture on the underside of the bones. I just like to have the nice soft meat, that's what I'm in it for. And just the same as before, we're going to go in heavy with the French's mustard, just enough to give it a nice contact. Now when I'm rubbing this mustard in, just the same as before, obviously I'm rubbing it in to make sure that all the nooks and crannies are covered so I can get a good even coat of my rub, but again I'm also checking for any loose bits of bone, any tiny little pieces that I might have missed, or catch them at a specific angle and make sure that we get them off there. And I'm going to go in heavy with this rub again. I don't use as much salt in my rubs as a lot of people in America do. I like salty food, but I don't like it too intense. I don't want my food to be spicy from the amount of salt in it, whereas mine's more herby and spice based. So I'm quite content to go absolutely to town on this and make sure that I've got the entire thing completely decked. Where it's not going to be sitting on the smoker for as long as, say, a brisket is or something, I'm quite content to make sure that I get this all in there, get it all patted in, and it just means that when it finalizes, it's going to have a nice crisp bark, which is going to set lovely when we put it inside the crutch and we finish it. Right, okay, so time for my super secret spritz. Bam! It's water. No, I'm kidding, it's other stuff too. So I like to add a little bit of apple cider vinegar as well. A bit of organic apple cider vinegar. Kind of feels very on brand for American barbecue. Very common ingredients, nice aroma. And just a tiny, tiny dash of chili sauce. Just a tiny dash, just a little bit, just a... I'll regret that later. Anyway, so that's my spritz. Just give it a little shake, and then that's it. We're ready to get these ribs on the barbecue. Let's go. Right, so what I'm going to do with these ribs, so I'm placing them so that they are lying just beneath the exhaust vent above it, meaning that as it convects the smoke through, we're going to get even smoking across the top and across the bottom. I've got the bone ends facing towards the fire so they take the brunt of the heat, and I'm just sort of stretching it out, making sure that it's laid out as evenly and flatly as possible so I don't get any sheltered areas where I've got uncooked rub, which just won't taste good. That's it. See you in 3 hours. Okay, so what I'm doing here, you would usually use your tongs or a piece of wood to try and break the spent fuel down into charcoal. It just makes for a more even burn. Now you can see I was trying to break the hickory with a piece of hickory, and it wasn't coming apart. Now when I placed the cherry on, it caught immediately. The hickory taking a little bit longer to catch. Just goes to show that even though it's basically the same thing, the two different types of wood and the two different methods of it coming to me in chunks or in planks make a huge difference when it comes to managing the fire.
Alright guys, so I figured we've got 3 hours left on this cook, so might as well talk about the wood that I'm using today. So, I'm using a mixture of hickory and cherry. So this hickory, it arrives to my wood guys in planks from America. It's imported. Let me see if I can't give you a better look here. Whoa. So this adds a lot of depth. It's a very strong, robust, intense, sweet, smoky flavour. I've heard a lot of people in America saying they find it too intense. Now, I don't know if maybe it just is milder because it's imported and it's a little bit older, or this is a naturally seasoned piece of wood. It's not been kiln dried, so cool. That's the thing.
Now, I did record myself talking about the cherry wood, showing the wood grain to the camera, blah blah blah. I have proceeded to delete it from my camera, and I can't work out how to undelete it. So instead I'm going to talk about it while we watch some cherry wood burning down as embers. Now, cherry wood's a really interesting wood. I've cooked with it in the past before when I was buying kiln-dried wood, and it tasted hideous and it added nothing. It just was a really bitter, sour wood, back before I understood that it's worth getting naturally seasoned wood. And so this naturally seasoned cherry that we've had, fruit wood does something interesting when you cook with it. The colour of the fruit, whatever fruit you were using, will then translate into the food. So this cherry wood, which is quite a mild, quite a sweet wood, with a little bit of sort of like a sour cherry taste to it almost, will add a really strong dark red colour to whatever we're cooking. In this case it'll be these ribs. The longer the cook is, the more pronounced that dark red is. So between the paprika and that dark red cherry colour, it looks fabulous. And the difference between kiln dried and seasoned is enormous.
Okay, so let's have a look at the fires. Yeah, we're ticking by fine. We'll need to put some fuel on there. Another lovely, glorious Yorkshire day. Tea and crumpets, because you don't want a beer this early in the day, do you? No ash in the tea. This is a good day. Okay friends, we are 1 hour in, let's have a look. Nice, nice, we're starting to darken down a bit.
So it's worth pointing out that the Spritz, while it adds a little bit of flavour, it's mostly there to cool down the exterior of the meat, particularly the part that's facing the fire. If that gets too hot too quickly, it'll burn, and burnt food just doesn't taste good no matter how you dress it up. Notice the block of cherry nearest me is giving off thick grey wafts of smoke.
I think I need to salt some ash.
So, what Real Mark here completely failed to record and gave no commentary for was something that I've only recently realised has been happening on my smaller smoker, and that is the ash being produced by the embers is starting to build up, and it's stopping airflow going to the underside of my fires. And so I'm using my tongs here to flatten the very soft ash down so that it's no longer blocking the fire and it gives it a chance to breathe properly.
There we go, made a world of difference. Okay, 2 hours into the cook. Let's have a look at how we're looking. Not bad. Not bad at all. Still firm. Right, another hour and then we'll get wrapped.
Okay, now it's time to make the crutch. So I'm going to use 5 sheets of tin foil laid out in a lattice here. Unfortunately, I've had to detach the audio completely because my washing machine was going mental in the background. But just imagine nice foily sounds. Into this crutch, I'm going to add some butter, quite a bit of butter. I would have used more, but I don't want to have a heart attack. This will be the fat that's going to draw the flavour out. Then I'm going to add a whole bunch of honey, loads of honey. It's going to be lovely and sweet because I'm then going to add a whole bunch of brown sugar as well. I'm really not holding back with this. I want this, for the 3 hours it's in the oven, to produce some lovely caramel. And a tiny bit, so much hot sauce.
Okay, so 3 hours in and we're ready to take this off.
How are we looking? Yeah, we're looking good.
Cool.
Okay, so we've bought the ribs inside. I'm going to add them over the top of my Texas crutch here, and I'm just going to add a few little extra goodies. So I'm going to add a good hearty bit more sweetness from this honey. I love honey on pork. I'm also going to add a whole bunch more demerara sugar, nice and sweet. It's already too spicy, to be fair. We're not going to need any more chili sauce or anything. Oh, never mind. What I'm trying to do here is to create an airtight vessel in which this meat is going to finish cooking, as is what a Texas crutch is, for those wondering. So by creating a tightly wrapped, no gaps, airtight vessel full of sugar and butter, I'm going to create caramel, which is going to coat the meaty side of these ribs. I've placed them in meat side down. Now, if you look carefully, it's around about now that I realise that I've missed out a vital part of this. I'm going to have to unmake this whole thing. Because if there's one thing that you need to add at this stage, it's extra moisture. Otherwise your ribs are going to dry out. And so I'm opening these back up because we're going to keep all the mistakes in. I'm adding a bunch of my Spritz that I've been using during the cook. I'm adding a heap of it. There was around about 100 millilitres went into this all in. I'll wrap this back up, and then I'll throw this in the oven. And so this is going to create some beautiful caramel. It's going to steam the meat that's been smoked, meaning that it's going to go super tender. Now, there are other schools of thought which suggest the 3-2-1 method of 3 hours on the smoker, 2 hours in the oven in a crutch, 1 hour back out on the smoker. I don't really fancy the mess on of having to light 2 fires. It also seems a little bit wasteful. We're just going to throw it in the oven. It's going to be fine like this. Maybe when I can afford down the line to waste wood, then we'll try the 3-2-1 method. But for now, we're using the 3-3 method, and I highly recommend it because it works just fine. You don't get a nice tacky finish, but you do get some moist, delicious ribs. These are ready for the oven. Now we are 6 hours in and these ribs are ready. Now I can feel when I pick them out of the oven that they're tender. Now one thing I haven't really mentioned much this episode is temperature. And that's because it's kind of a moot point when it comes to ribs. So I guess the temperatures of the cook chamber, it was around about where I knew I needed it to be. I'm going to poke it with a temperature probe here, and it's going to tell me that it's going to be at least 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Anywhere above 165 Fahrenheit, which is 75 degrees Celsius here in the real world, is food safe. This is way beyond that. Usually a lot of barbecues cook to temperature. Ribs, I'm just poking these to feel if they're done, and when this temperature probe shoots through like butter, I know these are ready. Now, one thing you'll notice while I'm opening this up is that I'm burning the merry hell out of my hands because these are ripping hot. I did give them half an hour to rest, but they still retain a lot of heat. This is like unfolding a delicious smelling Christmas present though. Now, where 5 layers of tinfoil may have seemed excessive, you can see where the juice, the caramel, has managed to seep its way out as it's bubbled up, as it's boiled while it's been finishing up in the oven. All that tinfoil there ensures that it doesn't get too hot too fast, it doesn't lose its temperature quickly. If I've got friends coming over, I know I can give myself a good couple of hours leeway either side, knowing that my food's not going to go cold before they arrive. It also ensures that you don't burn a lot of sugar into your oven, which I do all the time. One thing you may also have noticed is that there is no sound again in this part of the video. No, it's not the washing machine. This time I had the radio on in the background again. I'm still getting used to these things, and I don't want to get sued. So, it's the moment of truth. And these ribs came out absolutely beautifully. You can see how dark they are compared to how dark they were when they came off the smoker originally. That cherry wood has added a really strong dark colour to it, a really deep intense red. And as I tip this out here, you can see all the au jus that came from the caramel sauce that we made inside, also a deep crimson red colour. These ribs turned out absolutely beautifully. One thing that's worth noticing is look at how much they've shrank, considering the ribs originally, when I had them across this whole chopping board, they took up the entire surface of it when they were still attached to the belly. It's worth pointing out that these ribs are overcooked, probably overshot by around about half an hour, maybe even longer. Having them inside their Texas crutch for the whole duration of the final half of the cook means that they steam really intensely. Now the difficulty here, because these are Babybacks, the bones which run up into the meatier part near the top, you can't see where they are, and so I make a right pig's ear of chopping these ribs down into ribs. But with that said, me and the missus, we had them for dinner that night and they were excellent. Just a few notes on the flavour profiles. So the sweet worked really well. I don't know if I've really expressed how spicy I made these accidentally. Your boy likes his food hot and I struggle to eat these. My missus powered through as well, but hot. Next time I do these, I'm going to put a fraction of the spice in. I'm not going to use any chili sauce either because that was overkill. But the allspice, the coriander, these all shone through really brightly. This was a beautifully rounded flavour, and I reckon that rub would work really nicely for pulled pork as well. I really enjoy these curry notes in my barbecue. I'd be interested to hear if anybody out there in internet land ever ends up using this rub and this method of cooking ribs. I'd be really keen to hear how you guys get on. Feel free to get in touch. Other than that, thanks very much guys, it's been absolute gas. I'm going to sit with my missus and enjoy this. I look forward to seeing you next time.